Welcome back to Life to Code. In our last episode, we treated the head elements, explained CSE, and how to link CSE style sheets. This lesson is more of a continuation of our last lesson, so I'll suggest making reference to our last lesson before this one. We are going to be styling our work from the last lesson to look a bit more like this. Also, we are going to dive more into styling and talk about block elements, inline elements, and the inline block value. So block elements are elements that always take up the full width of the parent element. If the parent element has a width of 100 pixels, any block element nested inside the parent element is going to take up this width of 100 pixels by default. Okay, now it's possible to give the block element your own width, but by default it takes up the full width of the parent element. A parent element is the immediate element that nests or contains the element which you're making reference to, and the element inside the parent element is called child or children elements. Block elements also start on a new line, and this makes sense because block element takes the full width of the parent elements. Also, block elements has top and bottom margin, and margins are more or less like spaces around the elements. To explain further, we'll use this diagram here. So this is the body tag, okay, and inside this body we have the block elements. The block element is taking up the full width of the parent element, which is the body element. If we call another block element, as you can see, it starts on a new line. Okay, and for each of the block elements they have margins, okay, which I said are like spaces. I'll show you how this takes effect in our browser using developer tools, either in this lesson or in the next. If I don't talk about it here, just know it's going to be in the next lesson. So here are some few examples of block elements. We have the div elements h1 to h6, which I equally treated in one of our previous lessons, and if you watched it, I said something about understanding the fundamentals of how h1 to h6 tags work and why they were starting on a new line just like the p tags did. So I'm sure by now you should get the logic behind why it worked that way. So there are many other block element tags other than this. We might use some, we might not, but for now these are the most important tags and are mostly used in developing sites. Next are inline elements, and inline elements are elements that take up the width of the content in it. That is, it only takes up as much space as necessary. Inline elements are like the opposite of block elements. Inline elements doesn't start on a new line, they sit side by side with each other. Inline elements don't have top or bottom margins unlike block elements, rather they have side by side margins. Okay, a key point here to note is that you can't have block elements inside inline elements. So for instance, you can't have a h1 tag inside a span tag, which is an inline element. So as you can see, this is how inline elements are structured or behave. They sit next to one another. Inline elements have side by side margins and not top or bottom margins like block elements. So next are examples of inline elements, and as you can see, we have the span tag, the a tag, the I tag, the b tag, the br tag, the small tag, the image tag, and much more. Most of these tags here we've covered up their uses in previous lessons, but there are still more inline tags we haven't used and aren't shown here also. Next, we have the inline block value. So this is a CSV value, and no HTML element by default is an inline block element. Inline block value allows the elements to sit side by side next to each other just like inline elements. Inline block value has top and bottom margin. So as you can see, inline block value has some features of inline elements and block elements. I'll be showing you how all this works in our browser like I said, either in this lesson or the next lesson. So after a lot of explanation, let's start with our CSC. So in the previous lesson, we did this. We linked the style sheet here, okay, and now we are going to start styling the index.html file. So we come here and we style a particular element in CSS by calling the tag name of the element, then curly brackets. Inside the curly bracket is where you write the particular property you want to apply for that element. So if I give the body elements, let me type the body, give the body elements, let me say a background color, okay. So we are going to use the background property, then a column. So background, just okay, then a column. Then inside the background we give this a value, but we give this a value, and the value is whatever color we want, okay. Give this a value, and but first of all, before we give this value, to close this up we use semicolon, okay. So I'll use a semicolon here. Now between the colon and the semicolon we give the background color we want. So I'll just copy what I have here, paste that here, okay. So in CSS, colors can be expressed in different ways. You can either use RGB, which in full means red, green and blue, or a hex value, which means in hexadecimal, and so on. I'll explain this in the next two lessons or so. So if you want, fast forward to that lesson. I'll leave a link on the top right corner for you, depending on when you're watching this. So the next property I want to add here is overflow. Is the overflow property, and what this does is that it gives us the option to either enable our page to have a scrolling tab, or it removes the ability of a page to scroll. The overflow property can be applied to other elements, but mostly it's applied to the whole page itself. So we give this an overflow property. So let me just, oops, something's wrong with my typing today. Okay, gives an overflow, and we give this a value of hidden, okay. So you can see different values here, okay. So we give this a value of hidden, and this will disable our page from scrolling both horizontally and vertically. So if you only want to disable it from scrolling vertically, you use the overflow -x for horizontally. If you want to do that, sorry, for vertically, my bad. Then for horizontally you use overflow -y, okay. So now I want to define the height of the body, and we use the height property for this. And when defining the height property, we can use the percentage pixels of vertical height. There are other units in CSC, which are the EM and the rem unit, and this handles only the font size of an element. When using percentage, it defines the size as relative to the parent element. So for example, if we define the body tag as a height of 20%, this takes up only 20% of the 100% of the HTML document. Now if we have a p tag inside the body element, we give this, and we give it a height of 100%, it's going to take up the whole 20% of the body element, which for the p tag is 100%. So I hope you understand the logic here. If you don't, you can replay what I said and listen to it again, okay. If you don't still understand, then leave a question on the comment section. I'll reply that. So percentage pixels, viewport height, rem and em units are not only used in height or font size. Tons of property also use this, such as width, margin, padding and so on. So the viewport height is based on the height of your viewport, and this is denoted with a suffix VH in CSS. Viewport is the user's visible area of a web page. Every device has a viewport. Okay, so um a mobile device, every device has a different viewport. A mobile device has a smaller viewport than a laptop or desktop. So this varies from device. Okay, so one viewport height equals 1% of the viewport. 100 viewport height equals 100% of the viewport. There's also viewport width, and the same thing applies here. So next is the pixel unit, and what this means is the width or height of a dot that can be comfortably seen by the human eye without strain. I hope I'm making sense there. A pixel is a dot of the display, and pixels are relative to the viewing device. So the pixel is denoted with a suffix px in CSS. Alright, so next is the M and rem unit, and the M unit is relative to the immediate parent element's font size, while rem is relative to the base font size, which in most cases is the HTML element. 2em means 2 times the current font size of the parent element, and 2rem is 2 times the font size of the HTML element, which by default is 16 pixels. Okay, so I'm going to use 100 VH here. Okay, although I'll be showing you some examples of the rest of the units in the next lesson. I'll leave a link to the lessons in the top right corner too. So if you want to dive into that immediately, just click the link above. I would also like to give a width of 100%, although it's probably this by default. Okay, so let me just say 100%. Okay, so I'll save this and let's view this in the browser. Oops, stupidly. Okay, so this looks normal. All we did was just change the background color. That's practically almost all we did. So next thing, I want to go back to the code. I want to give the p tag a width of 90%, so that it takes 90% of the body. Okay, so curly braces with 90%, then a font size of let me give this a value of 94 pixels. Okay, so let's save this, view this in the browser, and it's looking a bit good. So next I want to give this a border. Okay, now we use the border property for this. Okay, border. Now we can make the border to be in dashed lines or solid lines, could be dotted lines, doubled lines, insets, outsets, whatever, but for now we want to give this dashed lines. Okay, so the solid value makes the border just straight and normal, and the normal border. The double value gives it double border. The dotted border gives it a dotted border. Okay, and so on. Dash gives it dash. Okay, so now when using the border property, we first define how many pixels we want our border to be. The more the pixels, the larger the border. So I'll give this a value of 2 pixels, and then next we define sorry, Then next we define the style of the border we want. Could be solid, dash, dashed, double, anyone that suits you. Okay, so I'll give mine dashed. Alright, so I'll next we have to define the color. Okay, so I'll just, let me come here, I'll copy this. Okay, and then I'll paste that here. Okay, so there's another way of doing this. Okay, which is instead of calling all of them inside one property, you could do them individually. So let me just comment this out here. Comment this. And we'll say border, oops, border with yep. Okay, we'll give this a value of 2 pixels. So border style, give this a value of dashed. Say border um color, and just paste this here and we'll save this. So okay, this is the exact same thing as what we did earlier on, but I recommend using the former method because it's just less code and it's easier to write. But first let's test out the two and see if there's any difference. So if I've saved this already, I'll just view this in Chrome, and as you can see it gives us a, the border we want. Okay, so I'll just do Ctrl Z here. Alright, save this, and still exactly the same thing. Okay, so next we want to center this. Element in the page. Okay, now to do this, there might be different ways of doing this, but I find this the best way and the easiest way. Okay, so we use a property called text align. We give it a value of center. So we want to center this text, okay, inside this border. Okay, so come here, say text align, give this a value of center, save this, and here we go, easy peasy. So the next thing to do is to enter the whole elements, sorry, is to center the whole element in the middle of the page. Okay, so we want to center this whole thing in the middle of the page here. All right, so like I said, there are different ways of doing this, but for this we are going to use the margin property and give it a value of auto. And what this does is it tells your browser to define the margin for you. Okay, and the browser is going to try to give each side an equivalent margin and center the elements horizontally on your page. This won't work if we don't give our elements a defined width. Okay, else the browser is going to automatically set the margin to 0 even though you give it a value of auto. Okay, so let me center this, say margin auto. So now that we've centered it horizontally, we need to center it vertically, and we do this by using the margin top property and give this a value of 200 pixels. So let me save this first and show you. So you can see it's centered in the page. All right, so the border too is centered. Okay, so give this a margin top 200 pixels. Okay, so remember I said margins are like spaces. Okay, they are practically like spaces, and what this means is that we should move this p element, the paragraph element, 200 pixels away from the top. Okay, so if I'm to save this, view this in my browser, and here we go. Just like I said, I must be a magician. Okay, so you can move this further down if you want to, but I'm fine where it is. So the final thing we need to do is beautify this a little more, and we need to give this text color. Okay, we need to give this color like you saw earlier on. All right, so first of all, we need to recall um how. Okay, so earlier on when I showed you a little preview of what we're going to do, this text had something like borders around it. Okay, what we call that in CSS is stroke. Okay, we call that strokes. Okay, so to apply stroke to it, we call the stroke property. Okay, so we go say WebKit. Now don't bother about this at all. I'll teach you this later on. Just follow what I'm doing for now. So text, then stroke, then color. Okay, so paste this. Okay, so this is practically the CSS property we use. Okay, this is the CSS property we use to give it a stroke. Okay, but this won't work. Let me save this. This won't work without giving it a width. Okay, so one thing I would like to say is, let me try just give you a brief of what this WebKit is here. So the WebKit is used to allow web browsers to render web pages. Okay, so I don't want to go any further or deeper in that, but I'll go into this later on in this course when we'll be talking about um responsive websites, building responsive websites. Okay, so next we give this, let me just copy all of this here, give this width. Okay, so give this a value of 2 pixels. Close that, save this, and there you go. Just created our first basic web page using HTML and CSS. So with just little code in our index.html file, we were able to achieve all this. So you can practice this on your own and try giving these different colors, change the border style and the text font size and so on. Okay, I don't really like the size of this border, so let me increase it a bit, maybe say 5 pixels. Okay, yeah, this looks good to me. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. I really put a lot of efforts in this tutorial, and it will mean a lot if you could please smash the like button so that YouTube's algorithm can show this to others and they can equally learn and find my channel. I'll leave all the codes for you to be able to download using a link in the description box. Comment if you have any questions, and I'll see you on the next tutorial. Bye.